had a little problem with Tim Cook yesterday. I said to him, Tim, you're my friend. I've treated you very good. You're coming in with $500 billion, but now I hear you're building all over India. I don't want you building in India.
The iPhone could get more expensive.
So how much is that next iPhone going to cost you?
Stop what you're doing and listen to this. This is one of the most terrifying things I have ever heard.
$3,500. That's how much an iPhone would cost if Apple were to manufacture it entirely in the United States. Today, that same phone retails for under $1,000. The staggering difference isn't about profit margins or marketing, it's about labor infrastructure and supply chain efficiency. Building an iPhone in America would mean tripling the price just to break even, making it unaffordable for the average consumer. And yet that's exactly what President Donald Trump has indirectly demanded. In a recent closed-door meeting with Apple CEO Tim Cook, Trump made his position unambiguous.
Now you got to build us. We're not interested in you building in India.
This wasn't just a passing remark, it was a political red line. Trump wasn't just criticizing Apple's outsourcing strategy. He was challenging the very foundation of modern global manufacturing: cost efficiency, cross-border collaboration, and global competitiveness. If Apple were to comply with Trump's demand, the company's pricing model, and by extension, the affordability of iPhones for millions of Americans, would collapse. This confrontation is more than a clash between a politician and a tech executive. It's a collision between two visions of the future, one rooted in economic nationalism and the other in global integration. And at the center of it all stands the world's most iconic consumer device and the question of where and for whom it should be made. The tension erupted behind closed doors in a meeting that would soon send shockwaves through global boardrooms. Trump firmly rejected Apple's India strategy, calling it unacceptable. To Trump, Apple's expanding manufacturing footprint in India wasn't just a business decision. It was a betrayal of MAGA, Make America Great, again the economic nationalism doctrine at the core of his political identity. Over the past 2 years, Apple had steadily shifted a growing share of its iPhone production to India, drawn by lower labor costs, favorable tax incentives, and a more stable regulatory climate compared to China. In March 2025 alone, Apple exported over 3 million iPhones from India to the US, a number that exemplifies how far the company has leaned into its India strategy. But for Trump, the issue wasn't logistics or cost, it was symbolism. His warning wasn't just political theater, it was a trade ultimatum. Trump made clear that if Apple did not bring production back to American soil, it would face punitive consequences: tariffs, federal investigations, and public attacks. Apple's carefully constructed global supply chain, built over decades for cost efficiency and resilience, was suddenly in the political crosshairs. This confrontation marked more than a dispute between a president and a tech CEO. It was the opening salvo in a broader war between economic nationalism and globalized production. Trump wasn't just targeting Apple, he was sending a message to every multinational executive. Global expansion would now carry a political cost. In a world where manufacturing is no longer just about efficiency, but also about sovereignty, Apple had become the perfect battlefield. Apple now finds itself trapped between economic logic and political pressure. Moving iPhone production back to the US is not merely expensive, it's economically unviable. Yet defying a president risks becoming a high-profile target in an increasingly protectionist climate. As this standoff escalates, it threatens not only Apple's supply chain, but also the broader architecture of 21st century globalization. Apple's response to Trump's ultimatum was subtle, calculated, and unwavering. While CEO Tim Cook did not issue a public rebuttal, the company's actions spoke volumes. In private conversations with Indian officials, Apple reaffirmed its long-term commitment to India as a critical hub for its global supply chain. The message was clear: Apple was not backing down. This wasn't a surprising position. In recent years, India has emerged as Apple's most strategic manufacturing alternative to China. In 2024 alone, Apple produced over $20 billion worth of iPhones and components in India, partnering with manufacturers like Foxconn and Wistron, and creating tens of thousands of local jobs. India offered Apple a combination of low labor costs, political stability, and a government actively courting foreign investment with aggressive tax incentives and infrastructure support. From Apple's perspective, the move to India wasn't a betrayal of America, it was a strategic necessity. The US lacks the scale, labor force, and supply chain ecosystem needed to build tens of millions of iPhones efficiently. Analysts estimate that manufacturing an iPhone entirely in the US would cost more than $3,500 per unit, making the product commercially non-viable. Apple's India pivot is not ideological, it's mathematical. India's stance reflected confidence in its growing importance to global manufacturing. Far from retreating, Indian ministers reached out to Apple to ensure continued cooperation and to reinforce that India remains open for business. That quiet assurance signaled something powerful. India was standing up to Washington not confrontationally but economically. In choosing to double down on India, Apple didn't just resist political pressure, it made a statement. The company aligned itself with a rising manufacturing power and reinforced the idea that global companies cannot be held hostage to domestic political agendas. For Apple, this was not only about managing costs, it was about maintaining flexibility, supply chain resilience, and market independence in an increasingly uncertain world. The pressure Apple faced was not unique. In fact, it was only the beginning. President Trump's campaign of economic nationalism quickly expanded beyond tech giants to other corporate powerhouses, starting with Walmart, the largest retailer in America. As tariffs threatened to increase the cost of imported goods, Trump made a public demand that Walmart should absorb the impact instead of passing price hikes on to American consumers. His message was blunt: do not raise prices. Walmart should eat the tariffs. Behind the scenes, the situation was no less intense. The U.S. Treasury Secretary personally called Walmart's CEO, urging the company to hold the line on pricing. But Walmart's response was sobering. While they were trying to mitigate costs, they simply couldn't absorb everything. Prices had already started to rise on select items, and more increases were inevitable. This exchange revealed the fundamental flaw in Trump's strategy. Tariffs may be pitched as pressure tactics on foreign producers, but in reality they function as taxes on American consumers. Walmart's supply chain depends heavily on low-cost goods imported from Asia, and any increase in import costs gets passed directly to shoppers, especially lower-income families who rely on Walmart's affordability. The ripple effects didn't stop there. Even Nvidia, the US-based AI hardware titan, found itself under mounting pressure. Amid growing fears over supply chain vulnerability, the company committed to start manufacturing $500 billion worth of server hardware inside the United States, a move previously considered logistically unfeasible just 2 years earlier. The motivation wasn't efficiency, it was survival. At Computex, Asia's largest tech trade show held in Taiwan, thousands of executives gathered not just to unveil new innovations, but to whisper behind closed doors about tariff sanctions schemes and tweet-driven policy risk. Conversations focused less on product roadmaps and more on geopolitical volatility. CEOs across industries from semiconductors to smartphones were asking the same questions. Will we still be able to sell to the US next quarter? What if the next tweet disrupts our supply chain? This fear, once confined to theoretical risk memos, had become operational reality. And in the background, a larger message was becoming clearer: build in America or be punished. This wasn't just an economic policy, it was an ultimatum being delivered across boardrooms worldwide. The line between business and politics was being erased in real time. In effect, Trump's approach had ignited a global reckoning. CEOs, investors, and governments had to ask themselves a new kind of question: not just what is efficient, but what is politically safe. And that's how economic nationalism, once considered fringe, began to reshape the global supply chain, one tariff and one threat at a time. What began as a standoff between Trump and Apple is now spiraling into something far more consequential: the real possibility of a new global trade war, not with China, but with India, the world's most populous democracy and a rising economic power. Apple's decision to invest heavily in India was not just about low labor costs. It was about risk diversification, moving supply chains out of China to mitigate geopolitical volatility. India, for its part, welcomed Apple with open arms, offering tax breaks, infrastructure, and political predictability. The strategy was working. India became Apple's second-largest iPhone production base and a central part of the company's plan to insulate itself from China-US tension. But Trump's message, build in America or else, changes that calculus entirely. If Apple continues to produce iPhones in India and faces punitive tariffs in the US, the cost advantages disappear. Worse, if Trump's target is Indian-made goods with blanket tariffs, Apple's India strategy collapses overnight. And with it, the US risks opening a new front in the trade wars, one not with a strategic rival, but with a strategic ally. This is where the stakes rise dramatically. India is not China. It is a US security partner, a counterweight to Beijing, and a critical node in the West's long-term geopolitical strategy in the Indo-Pacific. A trade conflict with India would undermine years of diplomatic progress and could push New Delhi to seek closer alignment with other powers, including China or Russia, an outcome directly at odds with US strategic interests. Moreover, the economic consequences would be significant. India's manufacturing sector is still emerging, but it powers a growing share of global consumer electronics, pharmaceuticals, and automotive components. Imposing tariffs or trade restrictions on Indian goods could send price shocks rippling through global markets, affecting everything from smartphones to generic medicines. From a business standpoint, the threat is equally profound. If Apple, one of the world's most sophisticated and globally diversified corporations, cannot escape political retaliation, what hope do smaller companies have? The implication is clear. The rules of global capitalism are being rewritten, and they now include a loyalty test, not just to markets, but to national flags. Trump's posture, while framed as a defense of American jobs, risks triggering a chain reaction with unintended and possibly irreversible consequences. If this escalates, the U.S. may not just lose a trade partner, it could lose a geopolitical ally, investor confidence, and leadership in shaping the next era of globalization. The clash between Donald Trump and Apple is far more than a corporate controversy. It is a symbolic breaking point in the global economic order, a moment where political ideology collides with supply chain reality. What's at stake is not just the price of a smartphone, but the future of globalization, the stability of trade partnerships, and the economic agency of multinational corporations. Trump's message was crystal clear. You're either building in America or you're building against America. It's a rallying cry for economic nationalism, powerful, simple, and politically resonant. But beneath the slogan lies a harsh economic truth. The U.S. no longer has the capacity, infrastructure, or cost structure to support full domestic production of globally competitive products. Manufacturing an iPhone entirely in the United States, for example, could make it unaffordable for 90% of American consumers. In this scenario, tariffs become taxes on the poor, and bringing jobs home becomes a euphemism for higher costs and fewer choices. Meanwhile, companies like Apple, Nvidia, and Walmart are forced into a no-win scenario: either comply with shifting political demands or risk retaliation, financial, legal, and reputational. The idea that the government can dictate not just tax rates or trade policy, but corporate supply chain strategy marks a profound departure from the rules that define the last 40 years of economic globalization. Most dangerously, this model risks creating a world where economic cooperation gives way to coercion, and where trade becomes a battlefield, not a bridge. If Apple is punished for choosing efficiency over nationalism, others will follow, not necessarily toward America, but away from it, toward India, Vietnam, Mexico, or wherever stability and rationality still prevail. In the end, the lesson is simple. Resilience cannot be legislated, and prosperity cannot be bullied into existence. Rebuilding American industry is a worthy goal, but doing it through ultimatums and tariffs rather than innovation and investment may come at a cost too high even for the world's richest nation.